welcome to the Download, where we bring you discussion and analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today is Wednesday, June 21st, 2023. I'm Michael Voris, here, of course, with our two co-hosts, Dr. William Mahoney, back from Jersey and hanging out for a few days and all of that sort of thing. Christine Niles here, of course, permanently. And we've got all kinds of wonderful stuff to talk about today as we continue talking about the Theodore McCarrick case 5 years ago this week, this anniversary. Sitting in the hot seat, number 4, there is Brad. Eli, you can see how like enthusiastic he is there. Smile.
Very enthusiastic. It's an honor to be on with you, Mike. It's always an honor.
That's not getting you a pay raise, man. All this week, as we said, we're looking at the 5th anniversaries, 5 years since the Summer of Shame, when we saw bombshell revelations about former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick and the Pennsylvania grand jury report, which came out about 6 weeks or so after the revelations about McCarrick. Today we want to discuss the consequences of the Summer of Shame for the church, specifically in the United States. Guys, what are your thoughts specifically on all of this? I mean, this is a giant earthquake for the church, and you're still feeling the tremors today.
Massive missed opportunities. For 50 years, missed opportunities to evangelize, spend the patrimony of Holy Mother Church correctly. How much was wasted down to those rabbit holes, the superstitious rabbit holes. And also just the lack of catechesis, bad liturgical practices, all of this fallout that has come with this homo mafia. And all they're concerned about is circling the wagons continually, covering each other's back, assured mutual destruction. If anybody goes down, we all go down, and promoting people continually up the. So you just have this. Vigano may have made some, Archbishop Vigano, the former Vatican nuncio of the United States, he made maybe some poor judgments in recent times, but he hit it on the head at this original testimony when he said it was this octopus strangling the life out of the church. Mm-hmm. And if that doesn't symbolize what's going on and has been going on for 50 years that we didn't really know about, none of us really knew about this, really understanding it until more recent times, and then really everybody understood it after 2018.
Yeah, something we've been discussing for the past couple of days is how much hope we had back in 2018 during the Summer of Shame that this was finally Our Lady. She's cleaning house. Great, this is a gift. You called it a great gift from heaven when you were doing those programs on Episcopal sodomy. Pope Francis needs to resign. We saw this as a great moment for house cleaning. And as we've seen, the McCarrick report turned out to be a complete and total sham. They blamed Pope John Paul II and Vigano, the whistleblower.
Blamed everybody who was dead, essentially.
Yeah, and the courageous whistleblower, and then Pope Francis is the great hero. I mean, it was like textbook gaslighting, and then not just that, you have the worst people now in power. You have Cardinal Cupich, who was handpicked by McCarrick, and yet here he is, probably the most powerful cardinal in the United States because he's got the ear of the Pope, and he's still in power. He's the guy who was heading the Rome Sex Summit, which was a total sham. And again, it just feels like very little has happened. 2.5 days on this,
and then a few months later, a month on the Amazon Synod.
Now, there have been some bishops that have been removed through vos estis, as we went over some of the numbers yesterday. About 40 bishops have been investigated, a number of them removed, some from the U.S., most from Poland, interestingly. But as far as I know, none of them were actually involved in protecting McCarrick. And that was the whole point of the McCarrick report, was not McCarrick, really. It was the whole circle of complicit clergy who helped him, and none of them seem to have been called to account except for Wuerl, but Wuerl still seems to be pulling the strings behind the scenes, even though he's been, resigned in disgrace. So
that's the last big thing for me, when somebody like Wuerl, oh, you were caught lying, we showed you, ha ha, he resigns. Really? You didn't go to jail? You're not sitting in a Vatican prison somewhere?
With a glowing send-off like Pope Francis.
How much of a personal expense account you have at your disposal?
Yeah.
$2 million.
Okay, and your penthouse suite
people need to know that.
Refurbished.
The Archdiocese of D.C. still pays Donald Wuerl $2 million a year in his expense account. $2 million. What if he hadn't been caught? $5 million? I mean, really, that's your penalty? You only get $2 million now?
My understanding is it's a slush fund that was started by McCarrick, and it's for the Archbishop for whatever his personal experiences, for personal expenditures are, which it's like $2 million. My understanding, I was corrected on this, is it's not $2 million a year, but it's $2 million total that he has, but still. $2 million is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money when you're 80 and you don't really have anything to spend it on, and you're not the Archbishop anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, that's just one slush fund. You have no idea about all the money rat holed all through church. I mean, when the Australian Pell was head of the Vatican, Secretary of Finances there, he goes in and looks into all the bank stuff. We did reports on that in 2014. 250 million euros just lost bank accounts, frittered, here and there, rat holed everything. Other numbers come out even higher than that. So the idea,
$250 million shipped over to Australia, but within months before those charges that turned out to be wrong charges, and nobody seems to be. Well, I don't know where the money went. What money? What are you talking about? What money? Well, it's $250 million. It's you can't deal in hundreds of billions of dollars like these guys do, and they're not, and particularly the fact that they're just unscrupulous people. And I'm talking about the hierarchy, and not think that bad stuff isn't going to happen. That's just a bad combination. Money, corrupt scoundrels, throw them in the same pile, that ain't going to end well.
Which brings up a second point. When we were talking about 2019, okay, the bishops policing themselves probably not going to do it, but the government maybe stepping in, following all those money trails. Where's all the money going? That's where you take down these guys. You follow the money trails. And all of that investigation, and where you at on Rico's going to come. We know inside sources, FBI is saying, blah, blah, blah. This is going to happen. And just, yet? No?
Yeah.
Really? How come? Why not? There's nobody went to jail. Nobody's the worst thing. Bransfield,
nobody's even been arrested, gone to jail. Nobody's even been charged with anything.
For your punishment, we're cutting you loose, McCarrick, and we're going to take your red hat. Now go out there and spend whatever money you got rat hole anywhere you want.
Yeah, on the question of McCarrick, he's, we all know where he's living. I mean, it's not a big secret. It's been now we knew way back after he left the monastery in Kansas. Okay. Who paid for that? We know because the bishop, the newbie little bishop in Salina, Kansas, did a local TV news interview, and he said, I got a call from Cardinal Wuerl, and he told me to put him here. Pump the brakes. He was laicized. He was no longer the responsibility of the church, materially speaking. He was no longer the responsibility of the church. Who paid to move him from D.C. over to Salina, Kansas? Were they paying a monthly thing? Who was paying that? McCarrick famously said once he became a bishop, he never took a dime in salary, which should be like a big red flag.
What's very interesting on that story is Cardinal Wuerl got on the phone to the bishop in Kansas right after our late colleague George Neumeier found out where McCarrick was living through his great sleuthing, may God rest his soul. But he found out that McCarrick was actually living in an archdiocesan mansion there in D.C. And when he found, and so immediately Wuerl gets on those, like, well, we got to cut him out of here.
McCarrick, the true Neumeier, the true gumshoe reporter, par excellence.
Well, even still on that point, so he gets moved to this other facility, again, a church-run facility just outside of St. Louis. He's been there for about 4 years. Who's paying that? That's I don't want to say it's like a nursing home, but it's for elderly, retired religious. He's not a religious. He's been laicized and reduced to the lay state. Who's paying all of that? Does he have doctor's bills? I presume.
He's 91 years old.
Yeah, who's paying all these? Who's paying for his food? Not that he's probably eating 15 steaks a day, but nonetheless he still has to eat. Who's paying? Again, there's all this. See, those are like questions that you can never get to the answer to because of this wall of secrecy that goes up in the church. And it's very, we can't talk about anything. Yeah, you can't talk about people's confessions, although as we know some priests do. But if you talk about anything else, I'm sorry, they just treat everything like it's some sort of papal secret and no one has a right to know. Of course you have a right to know. It's our money that, on the material sense, it's our money that's going to, fund this entire crooked organization.
Yeah, the original, this whole week was about the breaking of the news of McCarrick, which was really yesterday. The 5-year anniversary of that, and that was a lawsuit that goes back at the time 45 years. So now it's 50 years. So this goes back to the New York civil suit against McCarrick that was reported in the New York Times, and Dolan comes out and said yes, and the Vatican said, yeah, we're taking away his ministry again, which was already taken away, but reinstated by Pope Francis in 2013, so they had to take it away again. But anyway, what we're talking about here is 50 years ago, already 50 years ago, McCarrick had that abuse situation, and that's 1973.
Yeah.
1973, he's abusing someone. That lawsuit finally airs to light in 5 years
45 years later.
45 years later. So we're talking 50 years ago. We really don't see much justice. And in that 50 years' time, we're going to talk about how much money has been spent on all this massive crisis. And unlike World's estimations of that, it really is a massive crisis on so many levels. How many souls have been lost? We talk about people that commit suicide. Those lives are never coming back. We're talking about all the faith that's been lost, and those people are like, I'm left with the church. I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, what you're thinking if you're a family member, the mother or father, for example, of a young boy is abused and he just goes off the rails. I mean, that's completely understandable that he would. Maybe they're just weak faith, to begin with. Who knows? And then he goes and kills himself. I mean, what would be the and that's happened many times. What do you think would be the reaction of the normal reaction of parents? When all of a sudden, and we hear hundreds of times we have heard when people go to the church, the local bishop or the chancery and say, hey, blah, 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 blah happened. So come on in. And they have the church, the archdiocese or diocese legal team is sitting there and they're listening to all the information you have and they're immediately plotting how they can use that information you are freely giving them in trust against you, and setting the stage and building the legal case right there. Well, how do we know this? You're kind of going through something of like an informal deposition. Why are you meeting as the parent or the victim of abuse, or the parent of a abuse victim? Why are you meeting with the diocese attorneys? You should be meeting with the bishop, who should be throwing the bum out. But that's not how it plays, and we all know that. This is crooked as hell, and it's been going on since the McCarrick information came out.
Bernardin was bragging about the fact that once they started that reporting system, the number of cases started going down. Well, yeah, because you knew all the facts, you know what files to shred, you know how to spin the whole thing backwards. So yeah, exactly. You're going to meet with them, reporting to the diocese, and now I'm giving you all my information, and all these cases are just either being paid off quietly and they never come to light, or the documents are gone, shredded when they make a case against you. Oh, you couldn't because this affidavit says he was somewhere else, or whatever. So it's a bad situation.
The church just cannot police herself, and she's tried for a very long time. Her leaders have mishandled the situation, which it's been a blessing that many state attorneys general have launched these investigations. Now, those state attorneys general may hate the Catholic Church. Dana Nessel here, lesbian AG, hates the Catholic Church. But as we've seen throughout history, God has sometimes allowed secular authorities to come in to inflict punishment upon his people when his people are misbehaving, like the faithless Israelites. He would allow secular authorities come in, outside pagans to come in and
conquer them.
Exactly, because they were faithless, and that's what God is allowing now. So, and McCarrick too the reason he matters so much is because, not just because he's just one bad apple. Why are we focusing on McCarrick? It's not really McCarrick. He's just a symptom of a much bigger problem in the church that you've been calling out for years: homosexual infiltration of clergy. He was just one surrounded by this network of clergy who protected him, are still very much in power. And I think you have some statistics about the John Jay College, this study.
Yeah, there were, so everybody gets just sort of a bit of the timeline right here. So 2002 was when the Boston Globe releases its story, and then dozens and dozens of stories after that, and just kind of kept following up. That went on essentially the whole year. Came out in mid-January, if I remember correctly, of 2002. And then everybody else started picking up on it, going, oh, well, if it happened in Boston, how about LA? How about San Francisco? How about Detroit? So all the local medias and all of these places started doing their own investigations, and that's that's how it turned from a Boston case into a national case. And then from there, obviously, it springboarded to an international case. But eventually, the bishops had to respond to all of this collectively because it became a problem in the U.S. Catholic Church. So the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops went down to Dallas in 2004 and drew up a charter of here's what we're going to do to address this. Complete BS. They let themselves off the hook. McCarrick was essentially the main author of that Dallas charter, which completely exonerated bishops of any accountability or anything. So they saw, oh, this is, okay, let's find the minor priest who has done this, get rid of him, and then close ranks. And that's what they did. So, I mean, yeah, you got some, one step forward in the fact that you may have gotten to an abusing priest and gotten him out of the ranks, but 3 steps backwards because the system which allowed him to develop was completely untouched in all of it. So the numbers here, there were 2 John Jay reports. The first one was in 2004, that there were essentially 4,400 priests that were accused of sexually abusing 10,500 children between 1950 and 2022. Now, we all know those are the official numbers. Official numbers are never accurate. The only thing you don't know is what's the variance. Is it 2% more, 10% more, 50% more? There's no way to know, but those are the bottom line minimum numbers.
Can I just very quickly interject something with regard to those numbers? And I think this is an interesting point. The high watermark of abuse took place in 1969, which means, and according to the stats, the vast majority of the abusers were priest ordained before 1969 in the pre-1967-69 rite. So this fiction that people keep putting out, like the traditional Latin Mass is going to save the church, it's going to save it, we've got to do that's going to be the panacea and cure-all for the church. The vast majority of the abuse actually took place under priests who were trained in offering the TLM. So, yeah.
And certainly the cover-up network that was put in place was by bishops. They weren't becoming bishops in the 1960s. They were bishops back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. This whole thing is a giant deal. Yes, it's coming to light now and has been for a while. I want to make a correction, by the way. I said from 1950 to 2022. It's to 2002. Those 52 years is when roughly 11,000 children were abused, according to the official numbers, by roughly 4,400 priests. What has that cost the church? Well, let's just talk financially first. $4 billion and counting. That's with a B. $4 billion, and that's a lot of money even for crooked bishops. You imagine what could have been done. Look at all the Catholic schools that have had to have been shut in the last 10, 15 years. Not that they were transmitting the faith, but at least you had a chance. All the Catholic parishes that have been sold off. And then you move on to what we were talking about before the show, William. The spiritual and emotional and psychological devastation. You can't really attach a dollar figure to it, but there is money involved in it.
Absolutely, and it's just absolutely devastating too. Because another question that comes up is, how many people since 2018, since the Summer of Shame, have, rhetorically you can ask, have left the church as a result of this? Have just walked away? Especially like you were saying with the kids who, what do you say when your child committed suicide after being abused? I mean, how do you expect that person to want to hang around the church and so on and so forth? Pew, I think it was Pew Sitter, they did a poll on this in 2019. We have a graphic for that for some people who left the church and stuff. So there we go. So here you go. This was in 2019. So 46% of them were talking about the report. So it's very much on Catholics' minds. 27% of them started going to Mass less often. And this means not even every Sunday. 26% of them started reducing their donations to the parish, to the diocese. That's to be expected. And 18% were encouraged their own priests, to do something, to speak out, to challenge the bishop, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so leave that graphic up for a few minutes, guys. Those are really devastating numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, in a church that was already in decline for a whole bunch of cultural reasons, you inject this poison into that environment, and a quarter of the people, well, look at that, 27% go to Mass less often. They were already going to Mass less often.
And this was 2019, too. This was before COVID hit.
Yeah.
I'm sure the numbers are way down now.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah, COVID made it even worse, because then all the bishops just closed down the churches on top of it. So
you have to look, too, at those numbers when What were they hearing from the pulpit? What were they hearing from the confessional? If you have priests buggering other priests, are they going to be giving you straight stuff from the pulpit?
Right.
Or are they going to be preaching some, climate change?
God is love
claptrap?
and fix the environment.
Right. And don't be a Pharisee, which is any external action, that you could possibly muster up that would evidence your Catholic faith. So
That last number, 18%, encourage their own priests. Priests aren't allowed to stand up and say this stuff in the pulpit. A few do, but we see what happens when they do. I mean, that's true. Yes, you should at least encourage your priest to say, be strong, Father, da-da-da. But you know what happens. I mean,
Oh yeah, you're done.
You're over.
We published memoirs from Father Mark White, ordained by Predator. I encourage you to go read it. It's very short. It's very readable. He started speaking out about the whole McCarrick complicit clergy network, all of that on his blog. What does his bishop do? Barry Nestout. He sidelights him. He takes him out, suspends him, and now he's gone.
Yeah, and he has a case in Rome to actually kick him out of the priesthood.
Now we talk about the $4 billion. That's a lot of money to sustain in any organization, including the Catholic Church. And it didn't get sustained in several places. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the dioceses out there. This 13 dioceses that we're going to look at right now include one in Guam and Puerto Rico. The other 11 are in the United States. And also, these are dioceses that are currently in bankruptcy right now. And we'll have a rolling list here. We'll have the drum roll, please, to roll out this list of dioceses that we're all currently undergoing the financial pressure. Look at the number of dioceses. You'll read them off. Albany in New York.
Well, these are ongoing.
These are currently right now.
Right. This isn't all of them.
No, that's not. And we'll cover those in just a second. Dioceses in New York, Albany, Buffalo, two others in New York, Rochester, and also Rockville Center. That's 4 ongoing right now in New York. We'll talk about that in a second. One in New Jersey, Camden. Then you have the Archdiocese of New Orleans, Wilton Gregory's old stomping grounds.
Gregory Amond.
Huh?
Gregory Amond.
Gregory Amond, excuse me. Norwich, Oakland, California, Rockville Center, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Santa Rosa, California. Now, those 4 in New York all are tied directly to the look-back window that the New York Child Victims Act opened up. So, though there's actually five in New York. Syracuse, excuse me.
Buffalo, Rochester, Rockville Center, and Albany.
Yeah. So those 5, that's a lot of them right there, and that was all tied to that. These numbers actually give a shout out to Catholic Project. The data was from Professor Marie Riley, working at Penn State Law, tracks all this stuff. There are another set of 17 dioceses. Let's say we'll have more to say about this in a minute, but 17 dioceses that have emerged from bankruptcy, not currently in bankruptcy, but have actually emerged, went through it, gone through the process, and have emerged. And these are those particular dioceses. You got Davenport, Iowa, Duluth, Minnesota, Fairbanks, Alaska, Gallup, New Mexico, Great Falls, Billings in Montana, the Diocese of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Helena, Montana. There's only 2 dioceses in Montana. Both of them are bankrupt. Milwaukee, Archdiocese, Wisconsin. New Ulm in Minnesota. Portland, and that's in Oregon, not Portland, Maine. And then San Diego, California. Diocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis in Minnesota. Spokane, Washington. Stockton, California. Tucson, Arizona. Wilmington, that's in Delaware. And Winona, Rochester, Minnesota. So those are the dioceses. Now, naively,
This is the total who have declared and come out of and are still in proceedings?
Yes.
This is 15% of all the dioceses in the United States, and we're still counting.
Yeah, so that's 28 right there, and there's what, 260 dioceses, something like that?
I don't know, like 184.
182, that number of bishops. So
right.
The thing is, when I was naively covering this way back in, some years back, didn't realize. I thought, oh yeah, it's good, got them on the run, I'm putting the screws to them. Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, right.
Wait a minute. You guys just learned how to play the game. Oh, you have a $30 million endowment fund to just keep your cemetery mowed correctly, right? Under Dolan in Milwaukee when he was there. You guys, we talked about the Mooney holdings, and there was different places had their own, shell game. of all these fungible assets that they can move around, and oh, that's not able to be paid out for sex abuse because that's committed to this, and this is rat holed over here, and this is tied up here, and the amount that we actually have to run the ship is right here, and that's not very much left. So they would start with $250 million in assets, and then it would dwindle down to like, you know, 35 million or whatever. And I thought, oh, whoa, so this is my next stage up. My next stage up was, oh, well, they're just trying to hide cash. That's what they're doing here. Well, yeah, but then came the, you know, some stories later came the revelation that you're actually trying to hide the truth. Because when you go into bankruptcy proceedings, you don't have to do the whole lawyer thing and disclosure and prove anything.
Stops every lawsuit.
It freezes all of that, doesn't it? So, oh, how many times were you abused? Oh, 3. How much was that? Oh, okay, here, this is the amount you're paid out. And this is all you're going to get. So, yeah, you're shortchanged, and they weren't worried about this. You're shortchanged the money, but you're also shortchanged your day in court. Closure, the truth. You're never getting anybody to admit.
Victimized.
Yeah.
And also, at the end of the day, it's the average Catholic in the pew who's really harmed, because it's never the bishop, really. It's never the high-ranking clergy, because they're already protected. They've already got their retirement and health insurance. They've got all that set. So nothing's really going to happen to them.
Right.
It's the average parishioner in the pews who maybe doesn't get the help, financial help from the church that they might need, or, you know, the pro-life ministry doesn't get the money it needs, or whatever. It's these various things that affect average Catholics who really are harmed by all this. So it's a tragedy all around.
And some of those average
Dolan
Catholics
shoveled in $60 million into the cemetery fund in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee.
Oh, it was 60 million. I thought it was like 30 million.
No, it was $60 million. How many graves can you mow?
You know.
First, I mean, does that take care of it until the second coming? They got a nice lawn there when the bodies rise up from the dead on the last day. I mean, $60 million into the cemetery fund, really? Nope, can't touch that.
And I don't understand that. When you say bankruptcy, it doesn't touch this, and doesn't touch that, and doesn't touch this. It doesn't really touch much. Just kind of your operating slush fund.
That's all it does. That's all it does.
When you were talking about the average parishioner, there was a case with Bishop Warfield in Helena. And he was, I guess, naive enough to say the church is in the rears $20 million in this diocese. And we did a download
from the sex abuse payouts.
From sex abuse payouts. This was so funny to me. And he put it out to the parishioners. You know, we're in the rears $20 million because of sex abuse, and we would like you guys to go ahead and pay up for that.
Yeah, ante up and pay for that.
Oh, man. The little old ladies out there weren't having any of it. And there was we ran in that download, this was some years back, we ran there about all the comments that were coming in. It was just like ridiculous. This person and this person were like, no, I'm not going to pay that. You guys are supposed to be watching this stuff, and you guys let this go on, and you want us to pay for it? No. So, they're not on board with that.
I did a special report on Detroit's family of parishes, and I did some analysis of the Mooney Real Estate Holdings, which is Detroit's big way to protect its assets from bankruptcy. And I looked at the case in Santa Fe, the Santa Fe Archdiocese. They knew what was coming down the pike, and so they did kind of the same thing. They created their own little corporation. They put all of their assets into it, most of diocesan assets. And it's interesting because if you look at how many assets they had. So basically what happens is they create this real estate holding company, whatever it is, and it was only after they transferred all their assets into it that they then filed for bankruptcy.
Yes.
And then when they declared how many assets they had, it was way, 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 way less than what they had before. I mean, like by hundreds of millions of dollars, which meant...
Well, that's the point.
Yeah, exactly.
And several of these
to hide the cash.
And they're doing that all over the place.
They were doing that several years earlier than we were thinking.
Preparing.
2018.
Yeah.
They saw this coming, and it was like 2004, 2005. They were starting to shift assets around. Buffalo was doing that as well, and the number of assets that they had, like, okay, this is our slush fund operating, went whoo, in about 4 or 5 years, and you could just see. You guys were all seeing this coming, weren't you? It was the early 2000. Well, it wasn't long after the 2002 Spotlight thing when all that reporting started. That was about the time, about 2003, 4. They were like, uh-oh, and they started moving all this money off of the table. Mm-hmm. So really, I mean, I'm telling you, this is so These guys aren't about justice and equity and getting your day in court and the truth.
Yeah, I mean the combination of sort of the collective hierarchy, and granted every bishop runs his own diocese, sort of, what's the expression, all bishops are created equal, but they're not.
Some are more equal than others.
Some are more equal than others, that's it. I mean, but as a collective response of the bishops, who of course are trading notes and memos and emails, well, we hid our money over here, and well, you need to hide ours here, and all that conversation's going on. You think, the amount of money, total money that has been squirreled away, rattled, as you so appropriately say, has got to be in the billions of dollars. They've already paid out $4 billion in all of this, legal fees and settlement agreements and all of that. $4 billion. We're like, oh, I can't lose another $4 or $5 billion. So let's come up with a plan to, squirrel away as much as we can to make sure that, we don't care if the people get paid or not. I mean, somewhat, kinda, sorta, for the face of it. I think it's interesting to note, to show some examples of this. In New York, Dolan, Cardinal Dolan, the New York Archdiocese owns tons of real estate, the actual land, maybe not the buildings, most of the time not the buildings, but they own the land that the buildings in Manhattan and up and down the river, Hudson River, up and down both sides of it, or they own the land that all these things are on. So they lease the land out to big corporations. They get a huge amount of money from real estate. Can you imagine what a square block costs a month for a corporation to rent out in Midtown Manhattan? It's tens of millions of dollars. Easily. And so the property directly behind St. Patrick's Cathedral, some older folks may remember the name, the Helmsley Palace, Leona Helmsley. The church kept the land but sold the building on it, this beautiful Italian villa. It used to be the Archbishop's residence, directly on Madison Avenue and directly behind St. Patrick's on Fifth Avenue. Sold it for some huge amount of money. Leona Helmsley put a skyscraper hotel on top of it, but the church has the land underneath it. So about every 10 years that comes up for some sort of renewal. So Dolan took it knowing what was going to happen here. He could see coming down the road. From a shrewd businessman perspective, it was a good move. As a representative of the Catholic Church, it was immoral and awful. But he took out a $100 million loan, got it from Chase, Manhattan, and then set up a fund and immediately started publicizing everywhere. If you're an abuse victim, contact us and we'll square you up. You contact us, we'll square you up. Send us and they just kept drawing down from this $100 million, which was a loan on that land, and just kept writing checks to victims. The lowest amounts they could possibly get. Here's $20,000, here's $15,000, here's $30,000. Sign this secret NDA, non-disclosure agreement. Can't talk about it or we take the money back. And he just set up this entire system. That's why New York has not declared bankruptcy. The New York Archdiocese, which should have had by far and away the largest number of priests, therefore the largest number of abuse cases, that's why Dolan's never had to file for bankruptcy, because he was shrewd enough to say, oop, let me make sure that I've got my butt covered. He went up there during those negotiations to Albany when they were deciding whether they should do the look-back window thing and blow up the statute of limitations. I think it was for 2 years.
Yeah.
And he went back there and sat the big pleading, just sort of arrived at one of the hearings, and they were like, oh, the cardinal wants to speak. We'll go ahead and say, well, you really shouldn't do this. It's going to drive dioceses into bankruptcy and all that. It didn't drive dioceses into what we think when normal people think bankruptcy. What do you think?
Oh,
you have
ran out of money. Yeah,
you're poor. You're done. You go bankrupt in Monopoly. You're done. You lose the game. You don't get to go take a bunch of more money from somewhere. Hey, bank, give me all that stack of $500 bills in the tray there. It's not how it works. But for them it does, because they still have all the assets. They still have all, and it's such an incredible mess to untangle financially, and they play it. They play it very well. And who gets hurt? The victims, who go through all this and get re-victimized again by the same leaders, maybe not the same individuals, but by leadership in the Catholic Church. Why would they not lose their faith? It would be remarkable, really. It would be a remarkable, almost maybe not quite a moral miracle, but pretty darn close, for you to have been raped by a priest multiple times. You deal with however your life fell apart from all of that, then grow up, then have an opportunity for justice, and they screw you again. I don't know how you could possibly expect somebody, I mean, fortunately, our Lord is, the judge on all of that, and it's up to him to decide. But how could that not be the case, that you would just leave the church?
So we have these,
Many do.
these three layers that we just covered here, just a synopsis for the viewers here, of the comeuppings for the bishops, the correctional thing. First, it was all the disclosure, and heads will roll, miters will roll. Let's get a clean house. The church should actually be. We talked about the Gomez and O'Malley and DiNardo going to Rome and saying, hey, let's do this at the General Assembly, and that didn't happen. Investigate all this. Let's get it all, get lay people involved and empower them and all this to really work on this. Didn't happen. Then we're like, okay, well the police, RICO, federal investigation, FBI, someone's going to come in and clean all this house, and there's still no accountability. Then we're at the level of financial. Oh, you're going to go bankrupt, right? You don't have any money. That'll teach you. You'll see that this isn't going to pay. Crime doesn't pay. And it's like, well, we already had all this rat holed away, and all of us are still comfortable. And when we get kicked out, like Wuerl and McCarrick, we still have lots of padding. So there is still no comeuppings. There is no correctional, at least in the financial. So you're not getting the bishops police themselves. You're not getting the police to police them, and you're not getting the bank to police them. So, where is the justice going to be served? How is it? Is it going to actually come down to what Ratzinger talked about in an address back in '69? This smaller, poorer, tinier church of just, when there's no money left in it, for all the rats
laity. That's the point. It'll be a smaller, poorer, blah, blah, blah. For the laity, these guys, can't speak to what's going to happen to them after they die, when they go through their particular judgments. But until they get to that moment, there's no smaller, pure, poorer church for them.
This generation,
they still have their health insurance, they still have their drivers, they still have their house, they still have all their food, they still have their cooks and cleaners and their little entourage that follows them around. Nothing changes.
But how long before all that nest egg and patrimony is spent?
Yeah, and
it has to go somewhere.
Also, these newer, younger bishops, they're also largely inheriting a problem,
yes,
a historic problem. If you actually look at the John Jay report, you look at the statistics of the abuse, it's like this, high watermark 1969, and then it goes down like this, because Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict were trying to clean up the seminaries. They were trying to clean up the seminaries, and they were trying to produce a better crop of priests. And so it did go way down. It did go way down. And so most of these lawsuits that are now being litigated have to do with historic sex abuse. That most of them do have to do with lots of things that have happened beyond the statute of limitations. But we had Father Paul Sullins, who has done a lot of study on clerical sex abuse and infiltration of homosexual clergy. And he said that while it is true that it's gone way down in the 2000s,
according
the
to
concern...
the bishop, there's an asterisk next to that. That's according to the bishop's numbers.
If the stats are
they're the numbers they're the ones providing the numbers.
Yeah. But Father Sullins said, so while it looks good that it has gone down in the 2000s, his concern is it's beginning to go back up again because Pope Francis has relaxed the rules with regard to seminaries, allowing in homosexual, same-sex attracted seminarians. So Father Sullins, who's done a great deal of research on this, said, I think we're beginning to see an uptick now of that. So,
and I would say, too, this is a tremendous uptick in that, because it did shift from 2002 buggering minors to really the shift to seminarians, organists,
vulnerable adults
and adults, these vulnerable adult thing. That's where the shift took place, where those people are in positions where, okay, now you're a priest, and if you say anything, you're going to go to jail because you know too much. We make sure you know too much. We make sure you know certain things that you'd be complicit in, or have done things you're complicit in. And so there is a situation where, yeah, they're not, it's true that the abuse of minors has gone down, but there was that whole shift that we were trying to get justice, and at the summit in Rome, that they're saying, well, what about abuse of adults, seminarians, and that? And when Vigano talked to Pope Francis in 2013, he did not say McCarrick was abusing minors like James Grimes.
Yeah, he didn't.
He said he's destroyed generations of priests and seminarians. And that's where that shift took place from 2002 to basically 2018. All through up until the middle of 2018, and we've been reporting on that too. That's still going on with a gay organist, and the priests that are all shacked up and living around, stuff like this. And that stuff still isn't coming to light. You're not going to find those numbers out there, as Supich so blatantly said at the was it 2018? Well, in 2018 at the General Assembly in November in Baltimore, he said, well, some of these relations are consensual.
They're anonymous.
Anonymous, consensual, and so they don't really, apply here. Well, go talk to Harvey Weinstein's
maybe not in the little thing of minors, it doesn't, but that's not the, well, it's sort of the point. But
and he was talking about adults and adult predation. So that's the thing where, yes, there was that shift. So Sullivan, I mean, when you understand that, the guy knows his numbers and tracks everything right, but you have to look at where did it all go? Did those guys just all become chaste? No. They didn't become chaste. They just stopped targeting kids.
They didn't leave.
And they didn't
the whole thing.
leave.
But when the Soviet Empire fell apart, I mean, where did all the KGB agents go? They just did they dematerialize? Did they just vanish into thin air? No. They went and started the Green parties in countries all over Europe, and they just transferred themselves. This is the same thing that's happened here.
Yeah.
Are minors per se probably safer than they were prior to 2002 in the church? I think you probably have to say on balance, but not for any great moral charge. It's because the bishops don't want a guy around who's going to cost them a lawsuit. So they'll be much more, Johnny on the spot about getting him out or making sure he, goes and types papers or something in the chancery before they let him around children. But that, okay, good for the children not being abused. But what about seminarians? What about various people, young men in the parish who don't happen to have the protection of being under 16. It's nothing has changed except the area where the abuse goes on now. That the abuse has gone away, that's wholly naive to think that.
Yeah, and also you were talking about all the dioceses filing for bankruptcy. We have to remember it's not just dioceses. We have religious communities as well.
Orders, yep.
We have Christian Brothers Institute of New York. They've had to file for bankruptcy. We have the Crozier Fathers and Brothers Province based in Minnesota. They've also had to file for bankruptcy. The Oregon Province of the Society of Jesus, Jesuits, so much abuse among the Jesuits, and those are just a handful. Also, some of the dioceses have filed for bankruptcy twice. Like, for instance, San Diego, they filed for bankruptcy back in 2007. Now they're getting ready to file again. This is, of course, under Cardinal McElroy, who helped cover up a ritual satanic predator priest, Father Jacob Bertrand, which I covered in a special report. And also, one of the things that victims have been happy about is that more and more dioceses are publishing lists of credibly accused clergy. And so providing some sort of transparency there. There's still 15 dioceses that have refused to do that. They've come under criticism. And then there are some communities also. Some religious communities have decided to do it. Some have not. You have the SSPX, which has absolutely refused to publish their list of credibly accused clergy. We've called them out on that many times. They are less transparent than the so-called Novus Ordo Church, which I think is very interesting. But yeah, these are some.
I would like to bring up too, when you talk about publishing this,
Let Dr. Mahoney.
All right, go ahead.
No, it's all right. I want to throw in one thing. You mentioned Jacob Bertrand, okay? So he was in my class at the NAC.
Oh, wow.
So I know him personally, right?
Wow.
Well, I don't know him very well, and so I know this guy. So if you want to say, like, is this problem going away? I mean, that wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
Here's this guy getting ordained, and he was, as you know, was doing like almost satanic stuff with this girl during Mass. He was raping her during Mass, and and Czechia, who was the bishop there, who's another McCarrick appointment. He's in fact in Metuchen right now, which is where McCarrick got his start, and he was made a bishop there by McCarrick. I mean, he talks about that. McCarrick's at his ordination, to the bishopric and all that. Yeah. So I mean, I'm just telling you, like, it's all related, right?
Oh, McElroy,
he's one exactly right.
He was told by Richard Seip, the sex abuse expert, about McCarrick. He completely ignored it. He's the one who protected Bertrand.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's just been elevated to, got the red hat.
That's right.
Last fall. So.
And Bertrand, okay, so here's Bertrand. Now, Czechia had to sign off and recommend him for orders after, remember, he threw me out of seminary, but he recommended Jacob Bertrand for orders, and then he goes on raping girls during Mass, I mean,
you're just
well, I'm rigid, so.
It just sounds like sour grapes.
Exactly,
No,
yeah, I'm
NAC,
just angry.
Someone needs to do an in-depth look at the NAC, because this is not, it's considered sort of the elite, this is where we send the elite, the cream of the crop, that's where we go, and they come back.
Church.
Exactly, but people don't understand that it seems like it's
all
a
smoke and mirrors.
factory for producing homosexual clergy who then go on to have very high-ranking careers in the church.
Also, I just want to give you one more example of like how I'm telling you like this isn't ending, because also in the class, one guy, a guy above me, I know for absolutely of two guys who are practicing homosexuals in the seminary, and one of them gets sent to, I won't even say where, but somewhere in the United States, and you know the first thing his bishop does? He makes him the chaplain to the Boy Scouts. I mean, this problem's not going anywhere.
Well,
like,
you said you're
And you know, and I did that spotlight on the orgy, right? The orgy in Illinois.
Oh, right. I remember that.
Springfield bishop, who is now in Lucas, and
He's in Omaha now,
several monsignors were allegedly involved in this orgy. Okay, high-ranking monsignors who worked directly with the bishop, and we're going on eyewitness testimony here. Where did those monsignors go to school?
All went to
NAC.
Even Peter Harmon was supposed to be a part of that, and he was the rector at the NAC who came in after.
rector of the NAC.
That's all just like,
Cardinal was once the rector of the NAC.
Exactly.
Well, that's like sending your guys to West
remember
Point. You
that.
send the cream of the crop to West Point because you know they're going to come back, and that's where you would want to poison the waters, if you will, because those guys are going to be your leaders and decision makers. So it makes perfect sense to have that as a hotbed of homosexuality, because that's where your leadership in America is going to be sent to. That's just where you got your golden boy. You're going to go to the NAC and then come back and be fast track you to the bishop, and which they do anyway because you are already homosexualized. But there was one phenomenon we haven't really talked about when you mentioned about credibly accused. They're starting to publish those. That mechanism started to be used against traditional priests, weaponizing this whole, everybody's hypersensitive about, oh, you're accused, and now all of a sudden, guys like Perone get zapped, and we started seeing that more from about 2020 on, where you would start to be hypersensitive on some of these guys who are traditional, and yank with no, everybody, oh, they must be, because this is a whole phenomenon going on. Instead of really targeting, the whole cabal about who knew what about McCarrick, you can start using this system against, not a lot, but against, in some areas, against traditional priests, conservative priests, solid Catholic priests, just to leverage it against them, get them sidelined and whatever. And we had that case in spades here in the Diocese of Detroit with Father Perone at Grotto there. So, and you just know it's being weaponized. They're not actually worried about you having that issue or problem. They're just drumming up something and using that against you in this whole, sordid time that we live. It's just another way to get you out.
Definitely.
So,
is there a solution? I hate using that word because it makes it sound like, oh, we just do this and everything's fine. But on a human level, it's our Lord's church. He can do and will do whatever he wants to do with it and do whatever it is, and he has for 2,000 years. But in the day-to-day, on the human level, what's the response to this? What do you do as just, yes, I'm not talking about like abandon the church and don't go to church anymore. For those people who are, that small number of people who still are, do you just tolerate this and just say, oh, well, this is it? Do you go demonstrate in front of the bishops? It's striking to me that I don't know if it's a false sense of sort of obeisance to the bishops, but why are not lay Catholics who go to Mass and what we would consider faithful Catholics that believe what the church teaches, why aren't they on the just basic level demanding that the bishop and the chancery release the financials every year in easily understood forms? Stockholders look at that stuff in every corporation in America. Why can't Catholics say, bishop, and go, go to a meeting? He shows up at various things out there for confirmation, charge up the aisle before confirmation and say, we want to see the financials. Mass hasn't started yet. We're not being disrespectful. We want to see the financials of this diocese. You need to commit to do that. On just the most basic level, you'd be unless they produce incorrect data to you, which I certainly wouldn't put past them, you would at least be able to say, oh, look, you paid out $4 million in legal fees. What were those legal fees for? Was the diocese sued for somebody who tripped and fell in a parish parking lot? Or what's the breakdown of those bills? Can we please see those bills? What cases were being adjudicated in this? Why weren't you telling this all along? You've got to go to the documents. And I think only less than 10, I might be wrong on the number, but it's some low number like that, less than 10 dioceses in the entire country reveal just publish their financials on their website. You can't find them. You don't know what's being paid out. You don't know where the money's coming from, going to, shuffling around inside. It's remarkable to me the lack of clear thinking by faithful Catholics to demand an accountability of what can be accounted for. There's no divine secret over what are our finances. There's nothing to do with church anything. It's just the bishop is like, no, if people start looking at my papers here, they'll start figuring out I'm a crook and I'm covering up for all sorts of things.
Most Catholics,
that's true.
Most Catholics don't ask those questions.
Yeah, they don't.
Most Catholics are kind of indifferent. They're kind of just living their life, or they look to people like Church Militant to do that. And we're always like, well, you guys should do something too. I mean, we're already doing everything we can. But as far as solutions, my motto in life has always been, work as if everything depended on you, pray as if everything depended on God. You have to pray your heart out, and then you have to work your heart out. And unfortunately, I think there's this quietism or this pacifism or whatever passive nature among Catholics where you think you don't apply. It's like when it comes to stuff in the church, it's almost like, well, let's just pray and just sort of leave it to God to sort out. It's like, okay, yes, absolutely, we're not praying enough, we're not sacrificing enough, we're not doing enough holy hours and all that for our priests to make them holy, because we need to do that to help our priests. But we don't take that attitude, I've said before, in parenting or raising your family. You don't just say, lie in bed all day and say, I'm just going to pray and let God take care of dinner and do the laundry and do the education and the homework. It's like you do both. You pray your heart out for your children, but then you work your heart out for your children. You do both. But for whatever reason, Catholics just think, I can take this sort of passive attitude to the church and not do anything.
Yeah,
it's your family.
You're not like if you're a lay Catholic, you're not called to the eremitical life. I mean, there are some people who are called to be hermits, so go be a hermit and pray for the church all day, and that's your part in the body. But if you're a lay Catholic, you're in the world, and your part is to work in the world. That's a part of it. You're not called to be a hermit. So,
well, part of it was set up. The default of how to correct it for the laity. You can make your voice known, and you should, and to the degree to which you're an expert, speak up more. But our Lord kind of made it as a hierarchical structure.
Sure, He did.
And the bishop can always tell you to go pound sand, and so that part of it, it gets to a bad situation where we have, and really I would have to take the hard line here, and going back to the Catholics who were contracepting. I mean, you're going to have kids who are growing up who be selfish and egocentric and not be good vocations, and they just gamers and can play the system. So that's who you're going to get, and you're going to be punished, and they're going to be punished later on because your vocations, the priesthood, and also in civil life are going to be bad. You're going to have Joe Biden's out there and worlds out there. So it actually going around to be corrective and medicinal, all these things do work themselves out over time. But in that hierarchical structure, when things are so bad where you actually almost have to storm the Vatican with pitchforks and lanterns, and you're not given that option, so there's a problem there, and that's where the divine reset comes in. So there will be a day of reckoning. I think that's why it's going to come down to Our Lady of Akita's solution. You get fire from the sky. I know that's not a human solution, but in some ways it's a little bit comforting to know that God does have a plan, that was an approved apparition that talked about, bishop against bishop, that's the time you're going to be in, and fire's going to fall from the sky, and that's going to correct things. And I think I didn't think that had to come to that in 2018. I thought the church was going to clean house. I didn't think it was going to come to that in 2019. I thought RICO investigation, racketeering and all that was going to clean house. And then I thought, well, maybe 2020 and Trump didn't get elected. Not that that's necessarily the solution for everything, but and then 2022 midterms, and it's like, whoa, this is kind of going south. So we're having to be in a situation where the church can't correct itself, and society, civil society, church leaders aren't going to do that, and civil society is not going to do that, and the lay people, the way that Christ set up the system, aren't really empowered in that way to just go ahead and demand. So then it comes back to, okay, well, God, we've got a problem here. It's on your table. This is your pay grade, so let's take care of it.
This is your pay grade. This isn't ours. All right, guys. Very interesting discussions and all this. We'd like to remind all of you that if you actually enjoy, well, maybe enjoy is not the right word, but are appreciative of this kind of deep dive and the consequences of and the examination of it and the opening up of all of it to really help you understand all of this much better, we have an opportunity for you to donate to our specific McCarrick coverage this week on Download. But then again, of course, everything we did 5 years ago as well. I don't think there's a Catholic media outlet anywhere in the world that has been so on top of this story and its understanding and its analysis and all of that. That's largely a function of the very fine people we have here, former seminarians, theology degrees, everything. The staff here is extremely plugged in to all of this, and viewers and abuse victims and families and people who know all sorts of inside stuff are constantly contacting us and saying, check this, check that, check the other, here's that. And we begin to, here at Church Militant, we begin to be able to stitch together this tapestry. It's kind of an ugly tapestry when you're done, but it's a truthful tapestry of what things are. So if you're appreciative of our efforts here, please consider making a donation to us for our I'll call it McCarrick coverage, but that's just sort of the tip of the spear, as we all know. Thanks for joining us today for this episode of The Download. Now, as we sign out with every show, please finish joining us in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation and especially the church. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen. Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. Ad te clamamus exules filii Heve. Ad te suspiramus gementes et flentes in hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra, illos tuos misericordes oculos ad nos converte. Et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende. O clemens, O pia, O dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen. That's it. Thank you for joining us once again for Download. We do this every single day here, every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern. From all of us here at Church Militant, God bless you.